Hi, and welcome back to the Mom and Mind podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kat. And on this episode, I am joined by Gayane Aramyan. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist based in LA and specializes in perinatal therapy. She helps women and couples navigate pregnancy, postpartum, and parenthood. And today we are going to be talking about the postpartum period and ways that people can plan ahead to prepare for postpartum, some of the dynamics that come up in that postpartum period, including relationship challenges and communication challenges. And we're also going to talk a little bit about taboo and stigma of postpartum depression. And she's also going to share some of her experience as an Armenian woman and therapist. Gayane earned her master's degree in clinical psychology with an emphasis in marriage and family therapy from Pepperdine University. She has specialized training in anger management, emotion focused therapy, grief processing, acceptance commitment therapy, and internal family systems. She's been featured in publications like Women's Health, CNBC, Forbes, the LA Times, and Huffington Post. She's dedicated to empowering clients through life transitions and challenges of parenthood. So let's meet Gayane. Hi, welcome, Gayane. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm happy to talk to you for multiple reasons, but before we get into what we're talking about today, I would love to know how you got interested in perinatal mental health.
Sure. So I have a 4.5-year-old boy, and I had him during the pandemic, like
Mm,
peak of pandemic 2020.
yeah.
And even though I was a therapist already, there was so much that I didn't know about this postpartum phase, even
Mm,
the pregnancy phase. And I remember, once I had him and I went through the newborn stage, I wanted to heal first. And then once I kind of got through that, I realized this is something I want to help moms with
mm,
because assuming I'm a therapist, I should have known there was still lack of education and information. And so I can only imagine, what someone is feeling and going through and not knowing when they're not a therapist. And so I wanted to get trained. So I got my training in perinatal mental health. I've taken many workshops and since then started working with moms. My true passion is preparing for postpartum,
mm-hmm.
but the reality is I usually get the call 6 weeks postpartum, which is
All
still
right.
something, but I am really trying to make the change in, at what point we get that call and at what point we start working on preparing for this huge transition.
Absolutely. I agree with you. It would be so much better to
Yeah.
be able to prepare for it. And to your point, I mean, you don't know until you know. But I think with having conversations like we're having and you talking about preparing for postpartum and what that's like is part of that education and part of getting people to make a call to a therapist before they're desperate for help.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of people because I try to be very active on social media to educate and share the information. And I've had some, friends tell me, well, it seems like there's this negative, thinking about motherhood and they don't have kids yet. And I said, it's not negative, it's just lack of knowing that this could happen because on social media, we do see a different side. We do see, mom strolling through the neighborhood with her baby, but what
Right.
we don't see is what it took for her to get out of the house. What
Hmm.
we don't see is the intrusive thoughts, the crying before that happened. And that doesn't mean it happens with everyone, of
Right.
course, but I think teaching expecting parents about these things can help them
Yeah.
feel less ashamed when it actually happens and if it actually happens. I
Hmm.
always tell my expecting moms that when we do this type of prep work is I want you to almost like hear my voice whenever you're in the postpartum
Hmm.
and say like, oh, I remember talking to Vanna about this. She told me this could happen. Nothing is wrong with me. I'm just maybe going through something.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you made so many great points in what you were just saying. And I really want to highlight what you said about that we don't know what all she went through to get out the door. And can you speak a little bit to that? What you hear and what you see, the struggle being to just do basic life stuff sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, personally, because I gave birth in the pandemic,
Mm,
you can only imagine how already those anxious and intrusive thoughts feed into this idea of like, oh, I literally can't leave the house, right? Like
right,
it's
right,
not safe. And so I ended up like not taking my son out. I mean, we would like go on a walk or go to my in-laws or my parents. We would have family visit and be around with, but I didn't do the basic stuff like going to the grocery store with my son, honestly, for a while. One, it
mm,
wasn't safe to be around people,
yeah,
right? And then I was lucky enough to have our family help out. So I had the help and support to be able to leave him and go.
right, right.
But that's something, that many new moms struggle with now when there is no pandemic, right?
Hmm.
Like they
Hmm.
don't want to go to the store, they don't want to drive. And in LA, most places, unless you're very local to like a store, most places it takes about 20 minutes to get to.
Right, right.
And so, you
And
have
that
to.
could just be like a couple miles.
Yes, yes. That's what I was saying. I live in the valley and my office is in the valley. And yesterday took me 50 minutes to get to work. And I was just like,
Yikes.
what has happened?
Right.
But the drive can cause so much anxiety because what if baby cries?
Hmm.
What if baby needs diaper changed? What
Right.
if he needs to be fed? And
Hmm.
so a lot of these things cause moms to just not go out.
Yeah,
And
definitely.
typically that those are signs of postpartum anxiety.
Hmm.
If you're having a lot of fears about getting out, fears of what could happen, if you're getting intrusive thoughts, what if a car hits me? And of course, once or twice here and there, intrusive thoughts happen to us all the time.
Hmm.
But when it's consistent and it's preventing you from getting out,
Right,
or having someone help, or having your partner hold the baby, that's when we start thinking about, could this be postpartum anxiety?
right, right. And these are all really good examples of things that most people don't expect to have
Yeah.
happen, unless you already know you are dealing with anxiety and maybe you've been through this before. If you're new to the game, you're not thinking it's going to be hard just to go to the store.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because as humans, we are naive to things we haven't experienced yet. And when I'm working with expecting moms or parents, they'll often say, like, we're going to figure it out. It's going to be fine. And I always say, yes, you 100% are going to figure out, but I wanna take the shame away from it. Like, I
Hmm.
want you to be in the know that you may have these thoughts, you
Hmm.
may not want to, but
Right.
then we'll work on, having tools to be able to reframe your thoughts and to be able to get out if you want to do that.
Absolutely. What do you find to be the most common thing that like you wish people would know about postpartum?
That it gets better. I know it's cliche, but that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I remember when I was in it, I didn't know that there would be a light.
Hmm.
And I oftentimes as therapists, we're in school, we're taught to have a blank slate and to really, not bring ourselves into the work. But working with moms, I found that it's so important to.
Yeah.
Anytime I share with clients, like I've been where you've been and I 4.5 years into it, like it's so different. I
Hmm.
enjoy my son in a way that in the newborn stage, it was different. Of course, I loved him. Of course, I would do anything for him, but it was different. And it was
Right.
so hard. And often moms, tell me that it's a relief to hear that because it feels like, yeah, how is this gonna get better? And so I
Right.
wish people truly, and I wish they took that information and felt it because
Hmm.
again, as human beings, we're like very black and white in that, right? We either think everything's gonna be fine, or when it's not going fine, we're like, this is never gonna get better.
Right. Right.
So
It
there's
it
no
is
in
hard to
between.
see.
Yeah.
It is.
So I wish new moms knew that this is just a phase. And I say that all the time is that every phase of parenting, even now, the things we deal with in his age, they're
Hmm.
temporary. And that's a sad, and
Hmm.
bittersweet, but also hopeful message,
Yeah.
uh, because they grow out of it, and that's sad. But the hopeful message is that you're not gonna not sleep forever.
Right. Right.
You might not sleep the same way, but
Right.
you're gonna sleep one day. I
Right.
just had a client recently tell me, she's a new mom and she was talking about like, will I be able to have consistency in my life? And, I said, let me just tell you, I'm 4.5 years into it. You will have consistency.
Hmm.
Of course, if they get sick, you'll have to change stuff around
Right. Right.
but eventually they stop getting sick every second. And eventually you can go back to work, you can go to the gym, you can see a friend.
Hmm.
Um, Life doesn't end after having kids,
Right.
and I think many people think it does.
Um, yeah, and it like to your point, it can when you're in deep to some anxiety or depression, it is really hard to hold on to the idea that things will get better. So how do you help people prepare for postpartum so that even if they are experiencing something, there's some things in place for them to maybe even reduce the intensity? Like how do you help people with that?
Absolutely. So we really talk about I actually created a workbook. It's available on my website and it's a free resource to just kind of everything we talk about in one place and you can take your time to write. But I like to get very specific about what you think it might look like. Now, of course, things can change, but I think
Right.
having sort of a plan in place to refer back to can be helpful. So we talk about, the village. What is that going to look like? Do you have family to help out? Is there any resistance in asking for help? Because that's, of course, something we can work on in therapy, of being able to be assertive, ask for what you need, and speak up. If you don't have family to help out, can you prepare financially to hire someone? And again, this is why I love working ahead of time because you can budget it out if it's important. Let's say for a family, sleep is crucial. Can we prepare financially for a night nurse to help out, right? Or a doula? And so looking into all aspects of that and what that would look like. And if that's not possible, okay, what does it look like between you and your partner? Can dad take the shift from 9 to 2 and then you're 2 to 6, something like that? And we talk about these things because reality is, I mean, I don't think I talked to my husband about those things. We're like, okay, we'll figure it out. We'll see how it
Right.
goes,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And then when you're in it, you are struggling and you're too tired to put a plan in place. So we talk about shifts, we talk about support. I definitely psychoeducate about the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, not to increase fear, but to be aware. So if it
Right.
happens, they're aware of what it is, and then they can reach out to their therapist, tell their doctor about it, and seek proper help. If I'm working with a couple, this is great for dad to know as well.
Hmm.
Dad also can experience postpartum depression.
Right.
So that's information for them to know as well. Um, and we also talk about what self-care would look like. Can we put date night on the calendar from now?
Hmm.
And even if you're not ready, just have it there. And then if
Hmm.
you're not, you reschedule it, right?
Right.
But it's there so you can mentally start prepping for that event. And of course, it doesn't have to be date night. It could be time with your girls or
Sure.
a massage for yourself, something for you. We talk about expectations, what you expect from that period, what the reality might look like.
Hmm.
Self-care list gets created, a needs list, like what are my needs?
Hmm.
And then what I love doing is actually talking about like what fills your cup
Hmm.
right now before you have this baby. What are things that make you happy?
Right.
And having that written, again, something to refer back to is really crucial. Sometimes when I'm working with them in postpartum, I'll say, okay, can you bring out the notebook where we wrote the stuff
Hmm.
about what fills your cup? Let's look at those.
Right.
And what are the things that you can implement right now? Uh, and then the other part I think that is also crucial is talking to your partner and being able to have the tools to navigate the hardships that
Hmm.
happen in the
Hmm.
relationship and the changes. If I'm working with a couple, and they're expecting, we'll practice those scenarios.
Right.
Literally, I'll make up a scenario of, you walk in from work and mom is tired, she gives you an attitude. How are we handling this? And we'll just
Mhm.
practice. And it's made
Mhm.
up scenarios, but
Mhm.
I really want them to get in the habit of being able to talk about difficult things, right? Or made up
Absolutely.
scenario, family member crosses a boundary. How are we handling this? Go. Let's
Mhm.
role play and let's
Mhm.
see what that looks like. And teaching them assertive communication skills so they can talk about things. And then again, kind of creating like a needs list for the relationship, um,
Nice.
of what's a way you reconnect, what's a way you feel loved by each other.
Mhm.
These are things that we don't talk about, and it's so crucial in the postpartum phase to be able to, like, really connect back to each other.
It
Um,
is.
yeah, because
It's
oftentimes it's like you're passing ships and
mhm.
you don't really look at each other.
Oh, absolutely. Especially if you're, taking shifts and one person's up, the other person's sleeping, and it's very, very easy, surprisingly easy to get disconnected.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I remember someone told me before I gave birth, "Oh, wait, you're gonna hate your husband." There's no way. Like, what are you saying? I love him.
Yeah.
Especially during pregnancy, we got even more connected. I was like, there's no way. And then there was a point in postpartum where I remembered and I was like, I think this is the moment.
Right.
And of course it was lighthearted,
Uh-huh.
but I get it because it becomes so, especially if a mom is breastfeeding,
Yeah.
and it feels like, okay, their partner helps, but at the end nothing's happening to their body. And
Mm-mm.
so we want to make sure that you don't become resentful,
Mm-hmm.
that you're speaking about the things that are bothering you, you're able to connect with each other. So those are all things that we talk about when we prepare for the postpartum period.
Sure. How do you find people respond to this like prep for the postpartum? Are people like surprised at all of the things that they need to keep an eye out for, or even that they didn't expect to have to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely sensed overwhelm and I try to be very gentle about it, and how we approach each topic. I do see the best part. I do when they do have the baby and I am working with them after. It's really cool to see that they're either applying the things we talked about, they're having an easier time because we talked about those things and
Yes.
they'll reflect on it. But I would say overwhelm, a little bit of, that naiveness that we all as human beings have of like, "That's not gonna happen to me,"
Yeah, right.
or "I'll be fine," right?
Uh-huh.
But it is overwhelming, because we aren't typically no one talks about these things, and so to
Hmm.
have your therapist talk about, postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety symptoms, it's a lot to take in, and
Hmm.
so I think overwhelming is definitely something people experience. And then I have clients who are like, they love the homework. They're like, okay, I'm going to go work on this. We're going to prepare. And so it's different for everybody.
Well, that's true. Absolutely. Different people have different needs, and there's also so much variation in relationships, like between the couple,
Yes.
um, different dynamics that might come up. How do you find couples in particular respond to this idea that they won't be connected, or that they might have difficulty or have resentment in some way? But you already answered beforehand. They're like, oh, maybe that's not going to happen to me. But what do you see when it's happening, when they are in that
Your
space of
healing.
they're
Yeah.
not talking so well with each other and they're building resentment?
So the couples that I've worked with that then I saw them in postpartum had an easier time reconnecting.
Hmm.
If I'm seeing a couple in the postpartum phase and I haven't seen them before, it's really hard to reconnect.
Yeah,
It's a lot of work that needs to be done. So I am truly seeing, how important it is to start the work beforehand,
right,
uh, to start the foundation, to have a foundation to kind of refer back to.
right.
And it doesn't mean couples can't reconnect. Of course, they still do. It's just a little bit harder because it's more emotions, more pain, more hurt. Because it feels, when you're not prepared for it, it kind of feels like out of left field.
Yeah.
Like, oh, why does my partner have resentment? Why do I have resentment towards them? They're not helping me. They must not care about me. So it
Mhm.
becomes way more personal rather than with the couples that are expecting and we talk about it. It's like it becomes a little more externalized is the word I'm thinking about. It's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
here's this thing that could happen to us.
Right.
Rather than in the postpartum, it's like this is happening to us and we hate each other.
Mhm.
No? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, for sure. It's so much easier to make assumptions, um, especially when you're exhausted and
Yes.
really tired. I mean, your brain just does funky stuff,
Yeah.
with the making assumptions or feeling slighted, getting angry, and especially in that environment where you're talking about there may not be as much time to have discussions, or maybe they hadn't already set up time to connect. When are they going to talk about stuff?
Yeah. Yeah. Often couples are really tired.
Hmm.
And I would say for couples therapy, I actually don't, I haven't had any calls right in the postpartum period. I usually get it around maybe a year old baby, maybe
Hmm.
6 months.
Hmm.
For individual therapy, I do get it pretty quick after they give birth when they realize things are happening, but there is no time for a couples therapy, you
Right.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's also an interesting observation of like, okay, they're not going to prioritize their relationship for a minute.
Right. So better do it beforehand.
Yeah.
Like
Um,
have that framework in place.
yeah.
How do you, well, I'm not quite sure how I want to ask, but Um, in my experience, it is sometimes very challenging to get the birthing, to get the partner in, um, to get the husband in. Uh, is there? Do you have any thoughts or ideas on how, let's say somebody is in the postpartum having a hard time, having challenges with their relationship? How do you help them talk to their partner about coming in?
Yeah. Well, I think that both people need to be on the same page about the relationship needing work and both need to have the desire to make it work. I don't think you should be convincing your partner to come to therapy. I mean, it's good to like plant the seed, visit it again, talk about it, but convincing them or forcing them is not going to be helpful because that will
Right.
show like I can tell the minute they come in that they've been forced to do this.
Hmm.
And it usually doesn't go anywhere because they don't want to do it.
Right.
And I think you really need like one of the first and the couples I work with, I guess you can call it my specialty or just the couples that work with me, I make sure they want to work on this relationship,
Hmm.
because I can't do the work for them. I
Right.
can talk to them, I can teach them things, but if outside of the session they go back to doing the same cycle, they're not going to see much change.
Right.
And so I think, if you're considering couples therapy, you need to sit down with your partner, share with them why you're considering it, why you think it would be helpful, and asking your partner to be open-minded to the process and see, how it can help your relationship. It
Hmm.
always helps if like your friends have done it or
Yeah, it does.
people, and they share their impact and their process. Um, but yeah, definitely no forcing, no pressuring, just gentle reminders. And,
Hmm.
I think to it, I think going to your partner and sharing why it's important to you and why it's important for the relationship and sharing your experience instead of saying, you're the one who makes me mad. We should go to couple therapy so we work on you. Not the way to do it. Talk
Right.
about your experience.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is very important. Unfortunately, I find that for people who either haven't been able to do the work ahead of time, or who were blindsided by, how they felt, postpartum, sometimes, um, if the relationship was already in a difficult spot before birth, then things can worsen afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's so much harder to feel alone and disconnected during that time. So I'm all for people figuring stuff out
Yes, yes.
beforehand.
And that
It's
can contribute to postpartum depression and anxiety as well. You know, if you have relationship stress
right,
and you don't have a partner supporting you, that is a big risk factor. That's for sure.
absolutely. I see it too often, unfortunately.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah, yeah. So, I mean, that's a big old PSA to everyone out there. Try and get the support beforehand, the work that you're doing with people to help them prepare, both individually and as a couple, could make all of the difference in how they experience parenting, parenthood, marriage, and all of that.
Yeah, because it really shakes up even the strongest relationships, you know? So I think thinking that a baby's gonna fix your relationship, I don't
Mhm.
think that's true because it's gonna put your relationship to test, if any.
Absolutely, it is. So, if we can touch a little bit on the stigma around postpartum depression and really any kind of perinatal mental health condition. So, definitely that can affect couples if one or the other doesn't understand it. Let's say sometimes the partner doesn't get it or understand it, or there's just stigma in general for the mom who's experiencing it, this kind of internalized idea of like I shouldn't be feeling this way, or I'm not good enough, or is there any part of prepping um, for folks that helps with that, and or how do you cope, help them cope with the stigma?
Sure. Yeah, I think, prepping for it takes the power away from this scary diagnosis, and makes it more kind of tangible, more digestible of like, okay, this is something that could happen. Here's what I could do. Here are the tools I can use. Versus if someone is not prepared, it happens, they don't know what to do with it, right?
Hmm.
Oftentimes, first of all, they don't know that this is a sign of something. They just think this is normal. I hear that a lot. Like, yeah, I have intrusive thoughts. Yeah, I don't sleep at night, but that's normal. I'm like, okay, common, yes. Normal, no.
Right, right.
Healthy, no, it's not.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be staying up all night and looking at your baby to make sure they're breathing. Some anxiety over your newborn, of course, is normal, makes you human. If you didn't have any worries at all, that would be concerning.
Hmm.
But you shouldn't be staying up all night. And so I think having the knowledge of like, okay, I think I'm having really anxious thoughts. I might
Hmm.
want to tell my therapist about this.
Hmm.
So again, knowledge is power in that sense. And, just also, it's all social media that I think creates this image of what postpartum should look like. And
Hmm.
because nobody talks about intrusive thoughts, you don't see your favorite influencer talking about crying all day. You don't see those things. It's a highlight reel. I always think of Instagram and social media like photo albums. If
Hmm.
you look at, your parents' photo albums, you're not seeing them crying,
Right.
complaining, having depression, anxiety. It's just a picture of a happy moment, and that's
Hmm.
what Instagram is. It's a
Right.
modern day picture of a video of a happy moment.
Right.
Sure, there's now more people that are talking about this, which is great, but the majority isn't. You
Hmm.
might even have a friend who's going through it, and their experience is different because again,
Right.
postpartum anxiety, depression does not happen to every single person. I think the latest stat is 1 in 5. It was 1 in 7 at some point, but I just saw something that said 1 in 5. And so it's very common.
Hmm.
And with the overload of information and, everything we're exposed to, I think it's only going to increase unless we kind of prepare. We know the risks, we talk about it. That's how we can kind of break the cycle and decrease the risk factors from happening.
Absolutely. And for you as an Armenian therapist, I wonder if you see whether it's not just generally culturally in Armenian culture or specifically with people who come to meet with you, if there's any additional layers of struggle um, that because of, how the culture thinks about mental health or anything like that that you are seeing?
Absolutely. I think Armenians have come a very long way. I proudly want to share that like half of my clientele are Armenians, Armenian moms who seek me out, and it's really like such a great feeling knowing that they're not listening to the stigma, they're not falling for that, they're
Yeah,
breaking generational cycles
that's
and they're wanting to do something different. Now, by no means am I saying, how we were raised or the thoughts and opinions our older generations have is wrong. It's their opinions. They did the best parenting they could with the times and information they had available,
hmm
but it is very different now. We, as
hmm
moms and parents, have a very different type of pressure. We have information overload. We have these phones that are a blessing and a curse.
right.
Most moms are working moms or have some financial stress. Like it's just so different, right? And
Yeah.
so I do think there's an increase in anxiety and depression.
hmm
Now, did our moms struggle with that? 100%. I don't think they had the words to put to it.
Right.
They didn't have the diagnosis to put to it. They probably internalized, didn't share with anybody,
Right.
and suffered many consequences from that. I
hmm
could say that I see a lot of women now in like their 60s, Armenian women who are feeling really empty and sad,
hmm
not fulfilled. They're fulfilled by their children,
hmm
but they've given so much to them that now that they're kind of like empty nesters, they don't know what to do.
Right.
And so this new, I think the idea of a mom putting herself first is really triggering
Mm-hmm.
in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a new concept of like a mom taking care of herself, and having someone come watch the baby so she can go out or go work. But I think that everyone has come a very long way and everyone's becoming more supportive. It's almost like I can see even, like my mom, my mother-in-law, it's almost like they want to see us do something different. Like they're being supportive
Mm.
because they're like, no, like go live your lives. Like we'll
Oh,
figure it
nice.
out. We'll watch the kids, which is so sweet and nice. And they often give the advice too of like make sure to take care of yourself because
Mm,
we didn't do that.
mm,
Back in the day, these moms were very focused on the child, on the family,
right.
and hardly took care of themselves. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Gabor Mate's work. He specializes in trauma, and he talks about how certain personalities that are like people pleasers who like to do things for others and give to others later in life develop certain kind of disease. Like arthritis is a big one that's
Mhm.
correlated, even cancers and autoimmune diseases. So he's really big on that research. And it's so interesting because I do see a lot of women in our culture, in our community later, like in their 60s, have these diseases, and they
Mhm.
were the number one, like giving,
Mm,
giving. Even
mhm,
now, like I always joke like about my mom and my mother-in-law, they'll never tell me no, which
mm.
is such a blessing. But I'm like, no, can you please tell me? Like, if you have plans, don't cancel it. Just tell me. And even now, they're like that. They're so giving, and
Right.
I always think about that. I'm like, as a grandma, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be like, sorry, like I have plans. Joking. Obviously, I'll help my grandkids, but it's just interesting because they still hold on to that persona,
Sure.
and that way of being. So yes, it plays a big role. I do think there's a lot of change happening in terms of, postpartum depression, any sort of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I think that one is a hard concept for them, again, just
Mhm,
because the
mhm.
terms didn't exist when
Right.
we're going through it.
Right.
Um, but otherwise, I think they are, really rooting for everyone to make the change and be different.
That's encouraging. I
Yeah,
really I love that. I love that
yeah,
perspective. That is kind of the way, like, in the elders wanting um the younger generation to have it better than they did or have it easier than they did. But
yeah.
it is really hard that what you're describing, um that idea that, well, this wasn't something that we knew about. We just had to kind of just deal with it. or
Yeah.
suck it up or
Yeah.
pretend like we were fine and move on. And oof, it's hard. And it sort of makes me hope that there's still some kind of healing available for them.
Oh yeah, I can see it. I mean, I think that, the way they interact with grandkids and they also it's so new for them, the way we parent and the different ways we're like, oh, we don't say that, we do this. And they try their best to follow it. I don't blame them. It's just so, new for them, some of the
Sure,
information.
sure.
But you can see that a part of them is also healing when they're with their grandkids, and it's beautiful.
That is lovely.
Yeah.
I thank you so much for this conversation today. I know it's going to be helpful to a lot of people. Is there anything else you'd like to share?
Yeah, I just want to end it on, I guess, maybe a positive or a hopeful note. I think something that I wish I truly like took in and believed in is that, there will be a phase, there will be a season for everything. So if you feel like, you want to move your body and you don't have the time for it, there will be a season where you'll be able to do that. If you're not sleeping well, that will get better at some point. It has to. Everything gets better and difficult in other ways. It ebbs and flows. And to just give yourself that grace that you're not stuck in this tough time for forever.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you so much
Mhm.
for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
If you'd like to connect with Guyana, go to therapywithguyana.com and also find her on Instagram, Therapy with Guyana. For those of you who are listening who haven't yet followed or subscribed, you can find this podcast on all listening platforms, including YouTube, and now on Audible. And if you're already listening on a platform like Apple Podcasts or Spotify or anywhere really, go ahead, please visit that platform and give us a star rating. Please leave a review. Anything you can contribute will be helpful so that anyone who needs to hear this information can know that they've come to the right place. I thank you so much for being with me. Until next time.